So Marcus, thanks for coming along today. Can you just explain a bit about yourself, your position and what you're doing at the moment?
Sure. I'm the head of policy at an organisation called the Ana Liffey Drug Project. We're based in Dublin in Ireland. We are primarily a low threshold harm reduction service delivery organisation. And what I'm here to talk about is safer injecting facilities. So we've been very involved in the drive for safer injecting facilities in Ireland, and we've been involved in looking at the legal aspects in relation to that and also the operational side of things. So that's what I'm here for.
Okay, cool. So I know you've been heavily involved in the legal aspect of it, and obviously a little bit of a slightly different system in Scotland in the political system, but you were actually involved in drawing up the legislation, I understand. So what kind of key parameters did you have to keep in mind? Because it was a political process as well as a legal process, so you have to think about how that's going to play with the public, I suppose. So what kind of things did you have to think about?
Sure. Well, I suppose I'm a lawyer, and we started from the point of view of saying, well, what precisely, is the situation in relation to supervised injecting and the law in Ireland. So I did a legal opinion in relation to that, which set out the issues at national law and at domestic law. And then what we came to realise was that there would need to be a change in legislation. So at that point, the organisation went to the Bar Council, the Bar of Ireland, and sought support from the voluntary assistance scheme of the Bar. And a group of barristers, myself included, gave up their time pro bono to look at the legal issues involved and to draft permissive legislation that, if it was enacted, would allow for supervised injecting facilities to operate in Ireland. And when that piece of work was complete, then Ana Liffey gave the legislation and backup documents, etc., to the then minister at the time, Aodhán Ó Ríordáin. I suppose it was at that point that the political side of things started.
Okay, and so there was a fair bit of horse trading, I would have presumed, in that process. Not in your side, but once it went into the political realm. So what kind of changes did happen from there?
Well, I think the minister was very open and receptive to the idea of supervised injecting. We had previously issued a position paper in relation to it, so the case and the evidence internationally was getting stronger and stronger all the time. So I think really politically we were to a certain extent pushing an open door, and the minister at the time, Aodhán Ó Ríordáin, took the legislation and took it back into the department and started a conversation around it, and that ultimately culminated with him taking it on and driving it from a political side of things, which resulted in a cabinet decision. So our Minister for Health at the time, Leo Varadkar, brought it to cabinet in December of last year, and there was a decision to legislate. So that's broadly speaking where we are at the moment, and the legislation is working its way through the system, through the Office of the Attorney General, and we expect it to be published and brought into Parliament in the latter part of this year.
What do you think are the key aspects? Because obviously at the moment, within a few parameters, there's not going to be legislative change here at the moment, but to do a study program, to do a research program, you can work within those confines. But if you were then making it into a long-term permanent program, you'd need to think about legislative change.
Yeah.
So what kind of things did you have to consider changing, and what were the...
Okay, well, we looked at, I suppose the approach we took was to look at the law and to see what was the minimum changes you'd need to make in law. So we ended up with two kind of categories of things. The first were things that absolutely needed to be amended if you were to run one of these services within the law. And the second then was aspects of the law that wouldn't necessarily need to change, but would inform how a supervised injecting facility would operate. So the former ones, the two critical things there were possession. Obviously, if you have people presenting at a supervised injecting facility, they are holding themselves out as and are likely to have controlled substances on them, so they are committing the crime of possession. And in Irish law then there's also permissive offences. So if you have a bag of heroin now, you're committing the crime of possession. If I'm in control of these premises and I know that you have it, I'm committing the crime as well of letting you be here. So they were the two bits that fundamentally had to change. And then there's other aspects that we looked at, like protection from suits in negligence and that type of stuff. And then there's other bits which would inform how a supervised injecting facility would operate. So for example, you wouldn't have clients sharing drugs because that could be looked on as an act of supply within Irish law, and so on and so forth, those types of things.
Okay, yeah, fairly comprehensive look at it, which is, I think it'll be really useful, those sorts of things, when we look at the things we have to put in Scotland now and in the future, because we have the Lord Advocate's guidelines which would change, which would kind of support those sorts of things, but it's what you actually put in there, so looking at those guidelines. In a sense, in public opinion sense, how do you think that's driven? Has it changed? Is it more supports come on board, or is it kind of fairly neutral?
I think as time goes on, in general in drug policy, there's a realisation that issues that we face with things like public injecting and with issues like that in the public domain, they're not problems to be solved. They're there that are things to be managed, and we can either manage them well or we can manage them badly. And when you have people injecting down lanes and everything that goes with that, that's just indicative of something that's been managed badly. I also think in terms of the public messaging, there's a realisation that having people injecting down lanes isn't good for anybody. So it's not good for the people, it's not good for people who are running services to try to help, it's not good for the general public, it's not good for tourism, it's not good for business. So I think regardless of what people's individual views are, when you look at it globally, there's an acceptance that what we're doing isn't working and something has to change. And when you look at it like that, the evidence for something like a supervised injecting facility is making a positive difference are very strong, and that's why we should be implementing them.
Yeah, very pragmatic and evidence-based at the same time. Yeah. Did you bring in anyone else from overseas, like bring in people from Canada or anywhere like that in that process, or were you just using the evidence that was there to influence?
I suppose a little bit from, not so much that we brought people in because we didn't have the budgets, I suppose, to do those type of things. But our director, Tony Duffin, did go to Australia and spent a couple of weeks working with Marianne Jonesy in the Sydney Centre. And obviously there is a large amount of research evidence out there and available in the public domain. And last year in 2015, the EMCDDA had a piece in their European Drug Report on drug consumption rooms. So the information that you need to make the case is by and large publicly available. And then when we needed to localise that to Ireland and to Dublin, obviously there's been a huge amount done in recent years on public amenity and on Dublin as a city. And one of the things that repeatedly comes up for people is the issue of public injecting.
So we're thinking a little bit in the future here. So the legislation's gone through. It says yes, the vote's come through. What are your steps? What are you ready to do? How soon would it be up off the ground?
Well, I mean, it's a very good question. Obviously, having the law changed is one thing, and then implementation is quite another. And what we've always said is that first of all we need to be focused on making sure that the law gets changed and making sure that when the law is changed that it's fit for purpose. So at the moment, for example, in New South Wales there are things enshrined in legislation such as whether or not pregnant women or under 18s and so on and so forth can access the service, and also concerning the amount of licenses that can be issued, and I think those type of rules might be having a chilling effect on the efficacy of the service to meet the need of all the people who might use it. So I think there's a need, first of all, to lobby to make sure that that what we get is as open and accessible as it can be. And then the second side of it, that's going to be the million-dollar question. So there's now got to be obviously a process around how is this to be paid for, where is it to be located, and that'll obviously involve stakeholder consultation. But the focus in the first instance has to be on the legislation being right.
Have you done any preliminary work around where it's going to be located? You have an idea of where it would be?
Well, I think you have to locate these services where the need is, and where the need is in Dublin. In Dublin city centre is where we have problems with public injecting. So wherever it or they are, they need to be somewhere in the city centre. I would think personally as well that there's Dublin is a city that's bisected by a river, like a lot of capital cities, and people don't always cross the river. So people, who are on the south side don't always come north, and vice versa. So in terms of meeting the need, certainly I would think that probably having at least one on either side of the city is preferable.
Okay. Have you had any kind of preliminary talks with shop businessmen or anything like business people?
Yeah,
local business people.
We have, and where Ana Liffey is based, I suppose, is in a primarily commercial area. So our immediate neighbours and our immediate stakeholders are members of the local business community, and they're very important stakeholders to us. So we do engage with them on an ongoing basis around public amenity and around injecting in the area. And by and large, I think they're supportive of what we're trying to do. There's a realisation that, look, you're not going to stop drug use, and you're not going to stop injecting, and what we're currently doing isn't working. So we need to try something that is evidence-based and that will have a positive effect for everyone.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for coming and sharing that with us today. And I think tomorrow that's going to be really important to help drive the whole process forward, because it's a bit behind, but it's not that far behind. And I think it's that evidence-based which is the key thing, and going forward from there. So thanks, Marcus.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Cheers.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Cheers.
Thank you.